So thank you, Melinda. Thank you all for being here so much. I so appreciate it. You know, a lot of people across the country, they like to write off Kansas. They like to say that we're a red state. They say that it's unwinnable. They say that we're flyover country. And they say that we're a lost cause. But we have proven them wrong before. Kansas is winnable. Kansas is worth fighting for. And Kansas has everything that we need to make it the best state in the country to build a life. I'm Ethan Corson. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I'm a lifelong Kansan. I'm a state senator. And I'm running to be your next governor because Kansas gave me my shot. And I want to fight to make sure that the next generation of Kansans gets theirs. You know, when I think about Kansas, I think about it a little bit differently than I used to. I think about my two boys, Isaac and Aiden, who are 6 and 2. And I think about what kind of Kansas they're going to grow up in. What kind of public school they're going to go to. I think about what kind of work will be available for them. And I think about whether they will want to someday build their life here in Kansas. Because every family across the state, at the end of the day, they want the same things. They want a fair shot. They want safe communities. They want to be able to send their kid to a good school. And they want to have jobs and opportunity where they seek it. And that is what this campaign is about. And now, look, if you had asked 18-year-old me what I would be doing, governor would not have been on the list. You know, back then, I cared about one thing, and that was baseball. And I left home to play at Garden City Community College in Southwest Kansas, and that experience changed my life. I had teachers who pushed me, I had coaches who demanded more of me, and I had teammates from every part of Kansas who taught me about how big, how diverse, and how full of promise Kansas really is. Now, I didn't play as much at Garden City as I would have liked. I kind of got in the game if things were either going really well and we were winning by a lot, or if things were going really poorly and we were down by a lot. But to me, that is what real opportunity looks like, and that is what Kansas gave to me. Kansas took a pretty average kid and allowed me to go to one of the best law schools in the country. And then I went to Washington, D.C., and I was chief of staff of the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce, where I helped open markets for American producers, including Kansas farmers. That's where I learned how to lead and manage a big organization and to deliver results. Because being governor is not just about having the right opinions, it's about being able to lead, about being able to manage, and about being able to make government work for the people. And after that experience, my wife Jenna and I, we made a decision that not a lot of people make anymore. We came home. We came home to Kansas to raise our family. We came home to Kansas because this state had invested in me, and I believed I had a responsibility to give something back. And now I'm running for governor because too many Kansas families are doing everything right, and they're still not able to get ahead. Housing is too expensive. The cost of groceries and gas keeps rising. Childcare is unaffordable. And too many families aren't able to afford things like basic health care. And that is what, at the end of the day, this election is about. Because I believe in Kansas where you should be able to afford things like housing, like childcare, like everything you need to live your basic life. You should be able, if you work hard to send your kid to a good public school, and you should know that whether they choose college, technical college, or a trade, that Kansas will support them. You should Be somebody who's able to find a good paying job in your community and not have to leave the state to do that. And yes, if you work hard, you should be able to take a little vacation once in a while. That is not asking too much of your government. That's what decent government is supposed to deliver. And so that's the choice in this race. Do we want to have more political chaos, or do we want to have steady leadership? Do we want to continue to fight these same tired culture wars? Or do we want to be focused on solving problems? Do we want to have a leader who is focused on building people up, or somebody who's focused on tearing people down? You know, I know what it takes to win tough races and build broad coalitions because I've done it before. I'm the first Democrat ever elected for my Senate district. I'm the only candidate in this race who's lived in Western Kansas. And I'm the only candidate in this race, Republican or Democrat, who's been supported and endorsed by organized labor. Because we are building a campaign that can compete everywhere. Because you don't win Kansas by writing off most of the state. You win Kansas by going everywhere, talking to everybody, building trust, having those difficult conversations, and by listening, and by asking people to believe again in the kind of government that can actually be competent, be decent, and get results that matter in their day-to-day life. That's why I'm so proud to have the endorsement of both Governor Laura Kelly and Governor Kathleen Sebelius, because they showed that pragmatic, common sense Democrats can still win in Kansas, and most importantly, they showed that they can govern effectively. They showed that Kansans will choose competence over chaos. And I want to continue to build on that progress. Because look, I believe that Kansas is worth fighting for. I believe that our best days as a state are still ahead of us, and I believe that by working together, we can win not only this race, but races up and down the ticket. But belief is not enough to just win elections. We need more than that. It is going to take all of us working together, making the phone calls, writing the postcards, knocking the doors, having those tough conversations, and donating what we can. Because if we do that, we can compete anywhere in this state. There is no voter that we should write off, and there is no community that we should leave behind. So I know together we can do this. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
You cited three things. You cited the cost of groceries and gas, and then later on you cited the culture wars. Practically speaking, since we will have a Republican legislature, what can you do about those subjects as governor?
Yeah. So that's great. Did everybody hear the question? Do you want me to repeat it? Everybody heard it okay? All right, so on making Kansas more affordable, my number one goal as governor is to make Kansas the most affordable state in the country to have a middle-class quality of life. And so what I'm really proud that we announced at the beginning of this legislative session was my Working Families Agenda, which was a very specific set of proposals that we introduced to keep more money in the pockets of working Kansans and working Kansas families. Let me tell you some of the things that are in that agenda. Number one, we propose restoring the homestead property tax exemption for renters that Governor Brownback got rid of. We want to freeze property taxes on more of our fixed income seniors so they can stay in their home and age in place. For our young families struggling with things like the cost of childcare, diapers, buying their first home, and all of those things, we proposed a bipartisan child tax credit to keep more money in their pockets. We want to lower property taxes across the board on everybody. We want to end taxes on overtime. We want to end taxes on tips. So we are keeping more money in people's pockets, and we need to develop, as a state, a real proactive strategy to build more middle-class housing all across Kansas. We need to be building 5,000 new homes a year in rural areas, and we need to be building 95,000 new homes a year in our urban, suburban areas. And on the culture war piece, I've been really clear that that's not what I'm focused on. And, as I've traveled the state, we've done at this point hundreds and hundreds of meetings all across the state. I have never been asked about those issues that the legislature seems so focused on. So I'm going to have a lot of ink in my veto pen when I need to veto things that are going to hold Kansas back. And I'm going to work with the legislature like I have as a member of the Senate Tax Committee. I've been the ranking Democrat on the Senate Tax Committee. We worked to eliminate the state sales tax on groceries. We worked to eliminate income taxes on Social Security. I worked with one of the most conservative state senators to eliminate sales tax on 100% disabled veterans, to thank them for their service. So it is possible to work across the aisle and to get these big things done, and that's what I want to do as governor. Yes, ma'am.
What will you do to raise the minimum wage?
Yeah, that's part of my Working Families agenda. One of the things I'm proudest of is that I've been a leader of this in the Kansas Senate. Every single year that I've been in the Kansas Senate since I got elected in 2021, I've introduced a bill to raise the minimum wage. I did that well before I was ever thinking about running for governor, because it is just wrong that Kansas has the lowest minimum wage in the country. It is just not who we want to be as a state. It's just not what our values are. With our 6-year-old, I've started talking to him about the importance of hard work. And I think that that is a Kansas value. I think Kansans have a work ethic that is unique to Kansas. But at the same time, there is nobody in Kansas who should be working full-time and living in poverty. It's just wrong, and it holds us all back, and it's not what our values are as Kansans. So again, I've got a bill sitting in the Kansas Senate. Senator Francisco, of course, is a co-sponsor on that bill, and I am determined to get that bill signed into law as governor.
Yeah, the culture war comment applied to this too, and I'm just wondering as far as what motivates people to show up. And I understand not wanting to get into the culture issues, but I wonder if that's something that will motivate voters for you. Are you able to address people if things come up as far as this trans wedge issue or choice, those kind of things? Is that part of your platform that you speak about?
Yeah, on choice, reproductive rights were protected in Kansas in large part because of the work of so many people in this room. My wife and I, like so many of you, in 2022, we took to the streets, we went out, we knocked on doors, we talked to friends, family, and neighbors about the importance of protecting reproductive and abortion access in the state of Kansas, and Kansans overwhelmingly made their voices clear on that. I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood in both of my state Senate races. I have a 100% pro-choice voting record. And again, I have always been crystal clear that a woman's healthcare decisions belong to her. And that's been my position as long as I've been in elected office and before I ever ran for office, and that will continue to be my position as governor. I have voted in the Senate against every single bill that restricts the ability of a Kansan to make their own healthcare decisions. Similarly, you asked about some of the issues affecting the LGBT community, in particular the trans community. You know, the first time I actually ever spoke on the Senate floor as a freshman senator was to speak out against a bill that was targeting the LGBTQ community, particularly trans children. And so I've been really clear that my role as governor is to protect Kansans. My role as governor is to make sure that no group ever feels marginalized or feels lesser than by their state government. And I've been clear that as governor, we need to have an open and welcoming state where every Kansan is wanted, every Kansan is welcome, and we need the contributions of every Kansan to move our state forward. Because those kind of laws don't just hold back these particular communities, they hold us all back. They hold us back as a state, and it's just not the direction that we want to go as Kansans. And I've made that very clear as a state senator, and you bet that I will continue to make that clear as your next governor.
I'm gonna stand up and be here. I got to go visit Finney County Economic Development Team earlier this year, and their statistician named Shannon, he is fabulous, convinced me that they must have a four-year college. So I'm glad you went to school in Garden, but as governor, would you be willing to push KBOR in a better direction to get that established? Because it's a huge missing piece in our education landscape.
So I am good friends with the president of Garden City Community College. He was one of my teachers when I was down there. He's now the president. He and I talk regularly. We actually just talked on Friday. You know, people talk about, you know, Western Kansas and how are you going to work with Western Kansas. And, you know, one of the things that I bring that I think is unique is, you know, I already have those relationships. I have those friendships, and the folks there know that I care. So when there's an issue affecting Western Kansas in the legislature, you know, the president of Garden City, he doesn't just reach out to his senator, he calls me. Same thing, I had a board member from Pratt Community College in my office a couple weeks ago, because again, they know that I care, they know I have this passion for Western Kansas, they know that I understand Western Kansas because I live there. So what Garden City Community College is doing is they've had a really successful partnership with Newman University. And so they right now are working on, they've had a lot of success with it. I believe they're finishing their third year. Next year will be their fourth year with that partnership. And so they are working with four-year colleges. They feel like that model is working. What I would want to learn more about is just the feasibility of a four-year college in Western Kansas. I just would want to study that and better understand.
It's really a cultural issue.
Yeah.
Folks can't leave their family. They have too many
Yeah.
responsibilities.
Right.
And they've gone out of town that far away.
Yeah, no, what the chair said is right. So I think some of those partnerships are something that I think can continue to be expanded and explored. And again, I just would want to make sure that it's something that we felt like was sustainable and was going to be just viable. So I would want to learn more about it. I'm open to it, but again, we just want to study the issue and just make sure that it was something financially that would be a sustainable model. But I do think that these partnerships between our community colleges and some of the four-year colleges and universities have been a very successful thing that I hope can continue to be expanded, and I would certainly look to expand on those as governor.
What is your position on the private company wanting to bring nuclear reactors to Kansas?
So, right now we have some of the small modular nuclear is going on in Parsons. I think we are a ways away on nuclear. As governor, I want to study that and learn more about it and see if that makes sense before we do anything at a larger scale. When I talk to folks about it, the feeling has been that technology is probably 7 to 10 years away before it's really going to be something that we're going to be able to bring onto the energy grid in any substantial way. So I want to see what other states are doing, see where that technology goes, learn more from experts. But I think it's something that is going to be down the road quite a ways.
So you anticipate being able to regulate these facilities in some way? I mean, like private scares me.
Yeah, I mean, I think they would be regulated, by the KCC in the same way that the KCC regulates wind, oil and gas, solar, things like that. That would be my expectation. But I mean, again, I just think the technology is a ways away. It's very expensive, and so like Evergy, for example, has said that right now they view it as cost prohibitive. They're kind of monitoring it, but it's not something that they see right now, at least, as being feasible. But we'll certainly see where that goes in the future. Yes.
One of the urgent tasks, I think, the governor in this environment is resisting the federal government's infringements on our sovereignty, especially through ICE. We have had ICE agents come to this community and steal our neighbors. We have had federal officials intimidating local government to force compliance with ICE. What will you do as governor to resist ICE in Kansas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I look at this as an attorney. We, as governor, I want to make it clear that the role of governor is to protect the people of your state. And I will not hesitate to do that. I will not hesitate to stand up to the federal government when it is doing things that are not in the best interest of Kansas and that are putting our people here at risk. We need to be clear that when the federal government is operating in Kansas, that it has to be under the rule of law. That means that they have to be operating under lawfully issued warrants. That means that folks have to have due process. It means folks have to have a right to counsel. And I will be vigilant in making sure that those things are protected and that no law enforcement entity can ever operate above or outside of the rule of law, including ICE and including any federal government law enforcement agency operating in Kansas. They need to follow all of the same processes and procedures that our law enforcement here in state follows.
What qualities would you be looking for in a lieutenant governor running mate?
That's a great question. I've actually not been asked that before. That's a great question. I think first and foremost, it is somebody who, I think it's the same way that you look at vice president, which is somebody who, if something were to happen to me, would be able to take over as governor and continue to lead the state in a positive direction. So more than anything, it would be somebody who I think shares my values, our values, and also somebody who I think is going to bring a real ability to lead, to manage, and somebody who could be governor if that need arose. I also, though, at the same time, want the lieutenant governor to be somebody who is not afraid to give me their open and honest views. One challenge in roles like, governor or any real high-level executive position is can be a tendency of people kind of to tell you what you want to hear or what they perceive that you want to hear. And I really want a lieutenant governor who is not going to be afraid to tell me when they think that I'm making a decision that is wrong. So I want somebody who is going to be unafraid to tell me what their honest views are, I want somebody who can be a real partner in the governing process. And I want somebody who's gonna have their own ideas about ways that we can move Kansas forward in a positive way. Sorry, Representative.
Thank you. I'll ask you a question I'm sure people have asked you before. You know, I've been in the legislature quite a while. I've been through 7 governors. And I've had the privilege, really, of enjoying the progressive part of the state where we've had 3 women governors, all progressive. And the interesting thing about that is some states that claim to be larger and better have not had one single governor, woman governor. So what makes you the best of the 5 that I know of that are running for governor?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things. I think number one is that I think it's really important that we have a governor who understands the challenges that modern families are facing. Because it is completely different than the challenges were in even a generation before. You know, I think it's important to have a governor who has kids in public school, somebody who understands what the challenges are around buying your first home. You know, every single month, my wife and I, we make 2 car payments, we pay for childcare, we're still trying to pay off our student loans, we pay our mortgage, and we're trying to save a little bit of money to put away in our kids' college fund. That's a completely normal experience for so many families across Kansas. But in government, that experience is hardly ever represented. You know, that is a different experience than if you're somebody who bought your first home 30 years ago, than somebody who, you know, if 30 years ago, if you were in a single income family, my wife and I both work to make ends meet, and we understand the challenges. That is the dynamic that most younger families are going through today. Challenges around everything from technology to home ownership to the cost of childcare. I think it's important to have a governor who really has their finger on the pulse of what those things look like for real Kansas families. You know, I mean, one example is that the cost of childcare today in Kansas, 1 year of childcare costs more than 1 year of in-state tuition at KU. And so I don't need to read a study to understand what that is, because I've been living that every month for 6 years. We've been cutting that check. You know, we couldn't buy our first home until we were in our mid-30s. Again, that's a common experience for younger families. That's very different than it looked 34 years ago. So I think having a governor who understands the modern challenges. The second thing is, we need somebody who can step in and immediately continue the economic development success that we've had under Governor Kelly and Lieutenant Governor Toland. I think I'm uniquely prepared to do that, having been at the U.S. Department of Commerce in 2 different senior level positions where I focused on economic development and international trade. We have a lot of exciting opportunities that are on the table for Kansas, and we cannot lose momentum on those opportunities, and we need somebody who can hit the ground running. You know, I've already been kind of a leader on this in the sense that, you know, when Lieutenant Governor Toland goes to Japan to talk to businesses about investing in Kansas, you know, I've been the state senator who goes with him, because he understands that I have that background and that experience in economic development that we need to continue to move our state forward and continue that momentum. The other thing about my background that is really important, and this may not have been important 20, 30 years ago, it probably wasn't, but the experience in international trade and market access and opening markets. Because as I've traveled the state, so many of our farmers are hurting. We lost over 700 farms in 2025 in Kansas, in large part because of the tariffs. And so we need a governor who understands what market access means, how to do that, how to open those markets. What I've pledged to farmers across the state is that I will personally, as governor, lead as many trade missions as it takes to open up markets to Kansas producers around the world so they can sell their product. And I think having that background and that experience in international trade at a moment of trade wars and tariffs in a state where ag is the largest sector of our economy and farmers are hurting in the way that they are is going to be really important for me as governor. The other thing is, I mentioned it in my remarks, that being governor is very different than being a member of the Senate. I'm very proud of the work that I've done in the Senate, but as governor, you are leading and managing essentially a $25 billion operation. That is very different than being in the Senate and voting yes or no on things. And so I think it's important that we have a governor who can come in who has had executive experience. You know, when I was Chief of Staff of the International Trade Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce, I was at a relatively young age helping run the day-to-day operations of a government operation that was 2,200 employees across 78 different countries, 105 U.S. cities, and an annual budget of over $500 million. And I think that's the kind of experience that we need as governor. I also think we need the experience of somebody who's lived in Western Kansas. You know, we've not had a governor since Governor Hayden who's had real lived experience in Western Kansas, and that was over 35 years ago. So those are some of the reasons why I think that I'm the best qualified to be governor. And look, I think that one of the most important things that we need to do and think about as a party is we need to make sure that we have a nominee who can win in November. Because none of this matters if ultimately we don't win. And that's why I'm so honored that Governor Laura Kelly has endorsed me. She has won 2 very hard-fought statewide elections. And she endorsed me because she knows I'm the only candidate who can actually win in November. Same thing with Governor Sebelius. Governor Sebelius has won 4 statewide elections. She endorsed me because, again, she knows I'm the only candidate who can actually win in November. I think those people have the best sense of what it takes to win and to govern effectively than any 2 people walking the earth. You look at organized labor, which is the backbone of the Kansas Democratic Party. We've received the endorsement of 15 labor unions that collectively represent tens of thousands of families across Kansas, tens of thousands of working families, because they have the most at stake in this election, and they understand that I'm the only candidate who can win. And that's why every single labor union that has endorsed in this race has endorsed me. I'm the only candidate in either party that has the endorsements of organized labor. And the last point I'll make is we need to have an honest conversation about fundraising. And I would be the first person to raise my hand and say that we need to reform campaign finance. I'm honored that I received the endorsement of In Citizens United. They endorsed me because of my commitment to increasing transparency, reducing the influence of dark money in our politics. But we need to have a candidate who can go toe-to-toe with the Republicans in terms of fundraising. You know, what their reports have shown at the end of the year of 2025 is that they will raise, they will self-fund, and they will spend a record-breaking amount of money to try to win the governor's office in November. And we have to have a candidate who's going to have the resources to get their message out, combat the negative attacks, and make sure that we have the resources to win in November. If you look, it's very clear that we're the only campaign that can do that. You know, Jeff Collier, just to give you a sense, Jeff Collier in November 2025, a year before the election, spent over $400,000 out of a dark money organization on television. You know, so we have to be able to combat that. And our campaign is the only campaign that has shown that we have the proven fundraising ability to do that.
Thank you for your answer.
You bet.
What influence would you as governor have toward redistricting? Not to pick up more Democrat votes, but to just make our districts a little more sensible?
Yeah, it still trips me out, I'll just be honest. It still trips me out that when I saw Washington is y'all were in the meeting with the 1st Congressional District. I'm still not totally getting used to that. But no, I was on the redistricting committee in 2022. This is near and dear to my heart. I think that what happened in 2022 was a travesty. Myself and Leader Sykes led the fight against the maps that passed, both the legislative maps, the congressional maps, the State Board of Education maps. But I actually am so committed to this, I took it a step further. I actually had my deposition taken in the lawsuit challenging the maps. I actually testified at the trial in Wyandotte County against the maps. And so I've been leading the fight for fair maps long before I ever thought about running for governor, because you're right. I mean, we need a system where the voters pick their politicians, not where the politicians pick their voters. And that will be my commitment as governor. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned sustainability. I would imagine out in western Kansas, the most pressing sustainability issue is actually access to water, mostly groundwater. I know Laura Kelly has promoted a water plan. I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah.
Repeat the question.
The question was on water, particularly in western Kansas. You're right that this is a crucially important issue. It's something Governor Kelly and I have talked about. One of the big accomplishments from the last legislative session was the passage of a task force on water, where we finally got the right people, after decades of delay, we finally got the right people to come together and acknowledge that this is a real and pressing problem for our state and our state's future. Here's what a big part of our problem with water has been over the decades, which is that we have funded the state water plan out of the state general fund, which means that we make an annual appropriation every year as part of the budget for how much money we're going to devote to water. What has happened is that in years when the budget looks good, we funded water. In years when it doesn't, it's one of the first things that gets cut. And so what has been eliminated is the ability to make the kind of long-term planning that we need to do to address the water crisis. Because you can't make the kind of long-term plans and the long-term investments that you need to if you don't know how much money you're going to get next year. So our problem is not really the technical know-how. I mean, this task force, I think, is going to come up with the right steps that we need to take to address it. So my job as governor is to secure a dedicated funding stream for water. Just like what we do with our highway plan, with the transportation plan. That is funded through a combination of federal funds, a dedicated part of the sales tax, and the motor fuels tax. And so that funding automatically goes to the transportation plan. It's not subject to how much a legislator wants to fund it in 1 year or another year. We need to do the same thing for water. So my commitment as governor is to put into law a dedicated funding stream for water so we can make that kind of long-term planning, so we can execute on the recommendations of this task force, and we're not putting water at the whim of these budget committees where 1 year gets funded and the next year it doesn't. That is, to me, the long-term funding stream is the whole ballgame when it comes to water. Without that, I don't think we'll ever be able to tackle the water crisis in the way we need to. So that's my priority with water.
You have a question back here?
Oh, I was just gonna ask if you, when you mentioned all of your endorsements, what's your relationship with the Kansas Farm Bureau?
Yeah, I'm actually honored. So I've been going around the state. We've met with farmers in all parts of the state. We've been, talked to farmers in dozens and dozens of cities across the state. I have a really good relationship with the Farm Bureau. One of the things that I'm really proud of is that when I first ran for the Kansas Senate in 2020, They did not, Kansas Farm Bureau did not endorse me, they endorsed my opponent. But since that time when I got into the Senate, I've always had an open door to the Farm Bureau. I've spent a lot of time with them learning about the issues that are important to them. We've worked together on a number of pieces of legislation, and I was proud that in 2024, when I ran for re-election, the Farm Bureau did endorse me because we've developed a really positive working relationship. And what they would say, I think, is that, you know, I've always had an open door to the Farm Bureau, and I've had a genuine interest in learning more and really trying to understand at a detailed level the issues that impact their members. All right. Well, let me, just before I wrap up, I just want to say one thing, which is that it is just such an absolute privilege for me to serve in the Senate with Senator Francisco. I just want you to know how well represented your community is in the community. You know, Senator Francisco, whether it's in the committee process or through amendments, either in committee or on the floor, she positively impacts more legislation than probably any other senator, certainly any other Democratic senator. She's incredibly well respected by colleagues on both sides of the aisle for her acumen, for her knowledge, for her attention to detail, and for her willingness to work together. So she's been a tremendous friend and mentor to me, and it's just important for me to just say that to you, to let you know that you are being represented in such a great way by Senator Francisco. And I would say the exact same thing about Representative Ballard. I mean, whether it's education, whether it's procedure, there are just so many people who, when something comes up, they say, I need to talk to Representative Ballard. Because her word just carries so much weight, and she is so well respected by our colleagues. So Douglas County, y'all are doing a great job, and you're sending some great people to the legislature, so keep it up.